we owe Scott an apology because in our last agenda, if y'all looked at our agenda last time, we had Scott on there as a presenter to follow up from some information we had got from UNC School of Government, Tyler Mulligan and his team on development finance. And Scott was the next piece of that. And we got so sidetracked and deep in conversation with DFI, we left Scott off, and that was not by any intention. Scott brings a lot to the table, and we appreciate what he's been doing as the director at IPDC. One of the huge things that I think he's been doing behind the scenes is what we're going to learn about today. Because I do feel like the tool that Scott's going to deliver to us today is a real asset for us as a board or as a task force to consider wrapping recommendations around as we move forward. So Scott, apologize for our last meeting, but really we have your undivided attention and you are the star of the show today. So we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. And of course, I'm going to drop kick this thing to a good friend and member of the board, Heather Cotton, here in just a second, but I'm going to try to give an outline of where we are and what we're doing. In December of last year, 19, it seems like millennia ago, the Board of Directors for Isothermal Planning and Development Commission moved forward on a series of actions to restart, and I want to use that word restart, our Community Development Corporation that we have. The history of it, and I know that my predecessor is on the line. I think he's on the line or part of this group. I know he's part of this group, but he may be on the line, may not. But the history of our Community Development Corporation is that we had one, and we turned it over to the Buncombe, and I can't remember the full name of the group, but we actually folded down our CDC and our board elected at that time, and we turned it over to a CDC out of Buncombe County that was actually run out of the Woodfin area. That group has since ceased and desisted as a group, and our board has authorized us to re-enter. As we began to move forward with that, we have articles of incorporation, which include housing. It includes basically everything by statute we're allowed to do, and that a normal economic development district would be allowed to do, which would include things like regional consortiums that can hold home funds, or have the consolidated housing plan that has a loan RLF loan application process to it on the borrowing side. It can hold dollars. It can be a holding corporation. So we are working our way into that. And the thing that stopped us, it was two things that stopped us, and we're kicking it back up because we've got authority to enter with the Department of State Department for the state of North Carolina, is simply that we have continued to do the tax work, the IRS tax work for the nonprofit that no longer exists. So we have to kind of reconcile that issue. IPDC is also a not-for-profit, a 501c3. And so we file a 990A every year, but we were doing it as a development corporation. So we are sorting through with our attorney, who is Beth Miller. Some of you may know her. I think she's actually a city attorney and county attorney for several of you folks out there. We're working through that with our CPA, Carl Shaw, to dot the I's and cross the T's so that when we go into file, we're done. But authorization to do this has been approved by the board. We just have to get these last minute situations done. The board, when it put together the bylaws, envisioned several things. And it used 30,000-foot words like to be a holding corporation, to be a pass-through for those things that we want achieved under economic and community development in our bylaws and by state statute. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to participate in a lot of different types of programs and hold a different perspective than our member governments. As you folks may know, the counties the 4 counties that we have different versions of how they deal with economic development. Some are public-private partnerships, some are business organizations like they are in Polk, some are purely private on one side. All of them, however, are doing economic development and I would say in broad scope, but the narrow field that they're in is recruitment of industry and job makers into the region, into their specific counties and cities and towns. And they work with the public utility providers to make sure that they can do their end, find properties to locate these folks, and then work with folks like our local community colleges and our workforce development board to create workforce development and a workforce in which to engage. So those are the more traditional roles. We do not envision ours being in that traditional area. One of the things the board wanted to be able to do was fill the gaps where things were not being done, as long as it was done in a responsible way. Secondly, to be able to leverage other programs that may come through the IPDC. One way to envision, and I'll take a sidetrack here for a moment for everyone. One way to envision what IPDC is, I have a business background, and so I view it more like a cooperative or as a midterm broker. And the reason I take that attitude and that language, that vernacular, and is because a lot of dollars that come through IPDC are federal or state dollars. They can be private dollars, and they're targeted and have their own set of rules and performance standards in which they engage. Things like aging dollars. Those are very specific dollars that come through for very specific programs. Now, those programs can expand or contract depending on the situation and depending on the rules that either the federal or state governments apply. So in some housing dollars for HUD, for the Section 8, we become a midterm broker and a performance manager for those voucher programs. So we serve in that role as a midterm broker, and then we serve as a cooperative. We can bring everyone together. So things like the CDC that we're putting together, or other types of attempts to be together and to do either a very specific project or a broad set of goals. That's our role, and that's what the state statutes and, quite frankly, the federal statutes when we became a lead development district or an organization allowed us to do. So we broker Appalachian Regional Commission funds, EDA, Economic Development Administration funds. We can broker USDA funds. We can broker CDBG dollars, which are also part of HUD, or housing finance. So we can do a series of midterm brokerages, or we can be alone and then turn around to our memberships and other private partners and do just like what an EDC, an Economic Development Corporation, might do. We can have contributions in to that would then, as long as they qualify under the tax laws, we can then engage both public and private in order to engage either specific projects or broad goals. Housing is one of those specific things that we can do. So our board wanted this set up to envision how we could play ball, not to take away or to compete with our membership, but to fill in the holes and the gaps, to leverage and support other programs, and to coordinate and cooperate within the region in a way that creates a rising tide for the for the whole region, or helps specific projects on behalf of our membership. I'll stop there for a second. Any questions so far?
Yeah, real quickly, Scott, how far along the process is it right now? You said you're creating the articles of incorporation now, or have they been finished? Do you have how far along the process prior to submission?
We have finished all of the documentation. We just have to submit to the Secretary of State. When we found out that the other one had been merged and that we were still participating in the tax process, we've had to fumble in between that to get all of that lined up correctly from a legal perspective. That was just something we did not foresee, and it's taken us a little while to get there. COVID has not helped. So in us and our ability to finish that task. But we do have folks on that. It should not take very long. I've actually been authorized to incorporate. So once the attorney and our accountant are satisfied that we have the right documentation for those perspectives, we'll go ahead and file. Now, the bigger thing will be that we will name the workforce board, the Region C workforce board, which is also under IPDC and under Steve Lockett's direction as the manager of that division. We will use that board as what's called the interim board because it has a public-private mix to it already, while our board creates and names the new board. The counties, the way the structure works out, what our board adopted was the ability for the counties to name so many folks to the board, and then the IPDC board names the majority of those members, and the majority of members over 50%, so 51, I guess, plus have to be from the private sector. So it will create a whole new board in addition. Our board, the IPDC board, is very specific by statute and represents all 4 counties and the towns within them. Then we have 2 other adjunct boards. That would be the workforce board, and then this CDC board will also, it's a big board. Craig, if you're looking for something to do, I'm telling you, man, you can jump in with gusto on this one.
Scott, quick question on the board. Is this filing concurrent with SBA, like 504 lending statutes and all that, or is that going to be a separate filing after you've been approved by the SBA as a CDC?
Well, the state secretary of state is who allows us to be a CDC. So we file those documents there. Heather's nodding her head because she's had to do it. And she's going to give you some specifics on that. Which program we elect to do will be our choice. Now, SBA, as you've mentioned, is one area we could go into. There are other programs we could go into. The other process that is happening, shadowing this all, is that our board has also approved, and in hand, the application has been made to the Economic Development Administration to become an economic development district. When that happens, that opens us up into revolving loan funds and other programs that they administer that we could then take on. But we also have other folks in our region that do those things as well. For example, those SBA loans that you're talking about actually are also administered through several banks in our region, also with Mountain BizWorks. So there are other organizations that we have out there. Again, the direction from my board has been not to compete with, but to fill in gaps, leverage with other groups and existing groups where it will make a difference on our behalf. Some programs may work and some programs may not. It'll be up to that board in order to decide which ones they decide to dive into and direct us. Jim, there he is.
Just by way of history, the Certified Development Corporation is an SBA designation, and that's the reason that the organization was originally chartered, was to do the SBA 504, which is fixed asset financing.
Right.
Over time, as that program evolved and changed, we became less able to financially maintain that organization.
Yeah.
So the reason for the merger it was Asheville Buncombe Development Corporation, which renamed as Avista Development Corporation, they were certified by SBA for the 504 program. So it made sense to sort of move our portfolio and the management of any ongoing programs to Avista, because quite frankly, it was losing money and we didn't have money to put into it. So A little further down the road, Avista, because of changes in the SBA 504 program, determined that it was no longer financially viable. And the board at that time, Harry Grimes and I both sat on it, elected, and Avista was not a 501c3. They were a slightly different, more of a for-profit variant when those types of organizations were eligible for SBA designation. But at any rate, because there were a number of statewide organizations that were doing SBA 504 lending, we felt like it was in everybody's best interest to just stop that program because there were other avenues. So that's kind of in a nutshell how we wound up putting the development or the CDC to bed.
Yeah. We, however, are doing a broader CDC. So our
Right.
CDC is another statutory creation. It's not tied
Right.
to any particular funding source. So ours will have a broad swath. The board that governs it will then determine what programs it wants to jump into. And
Right,
it will
correct.
be a rather large board. So our board has quite a task, but the workforce board will serve as the interim board in that interim because of its current mix of public and private. So that's how we'll manage that in the short run. Okay, so that's where we are. We intend to do that. There are a series of things going on, and then I want to introduce Heather. Heather, we have 2 active CDCs that I'm aware of. There may be more. In our current isothermal region, one of them is Heather is going to talk about the one that they've started in the city of Marion. And then there is one in Cleveland County, both with a focus on housing. So we're going to talk about that here in just a second. But before we get there, I also wanted to highlight 2 other things that were brought up at the last meeting and let you know that these are also part of the marching orders for the CDC. And that is that there is a convergence of things going on. The housing task force, as you guys meet, one of the things you have to come up with is a report at the end of this, a housing plan. That's kind of where you guys want to go. And you've been trying to figure out what the form and function of that will look like. We're going to have the bones to that. The data that we put together is about 75% of the data that we need. And we're going to complete probably another 25% of that data and insert it in a process that we have going on right now. Our staff is working both on the community and economic development side and on our housing staff on our 5-year housing plan. That is a required piece of documentation by Housing and Urban Development in order for us to carry on our Housing Choice Voucher Program. So while we are doing that, we have decided to expand the scope of that to include input from you folks, and you will be hearing more about that in the next couple of weeks on how we plan to do that. And it will include also the work that we're doing on landlord outreach with, we actually are getting ready to hire a consultant. We put out an RFQ for those, and we're working with them on the agreement on how to expand the amount of available landlords and product into our HCV program. But we want to tie all of that together so that you guys have the basis of your housing task force report and these 2 other documents that you will then be able to use and build upon where you guys want to go. What do you expect? Do you want a consolidated housing plan region-wide? Yes, should be your answer to that, by the way. Because that consolidated housing plan is also the kind of thing that we want to be able to have on record and maintain, so that if Heather and Marion or Mel, who is now handling Rutherford Housing, want to apply for other types of funding sources and grants, we have a region-wide housing consolidated housing plan. So consolidated housing doesn't mean you do it evenly across all 4 counties. It means that housing is important in all 4. We have various types of projects and resources in which to go after. we have a place to then put larger amounts of money in case we want to do a regional consortium with home funds, which would allow us to leverage larger amounts of money throughout the region so that people could begin doing products and projects. So there's a couple other sources that are going on. There's also another series of studies that are going on by the Dogwood Trust, and they're I guess it's not a sister organization, or a sub-organization, but it's the other hospitals that were once part of Mission also created another group called the Gateway. That's a series of other health providers that were part of something in the sale. Gateway was created too for different purposes. And then there's Dogwood. Both are conducting market studies for each of the Western counties that they served. They've been apparently are going to include Cleveland as well, which would help us. So we're going to reach out to Dogwood. They have said previously that they would be glad to work with us on that. So if we can include that data and those market studies in this, then we can create data, information, and a housing plan that could be pretty robust, not only for our HCV program, but for what the task force wants to do. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that those kinds of things were going on. And the second piece, it was brought up last time that what would be our relationship with something like housing assistance, which is a Sarah Grimes group out of Hendersonville. Sarah Grimes group is a consortium. It's a not-for-profit organization that basically deal flows various programs in Henderson, Transylvania, and Polk County. It also has been doing some work in McDowell County, and has been at the request and interest of several of our members, both in Rutherford and in Cleveland. Our board, IPDC's board, also engaged the authority for management to enter into an agreement with housing assistance back in December. And as of late this morning, we were still talking with housing assistance about how we could really get into the consolidated housing plan, working with them as a aide de camp and assisting us, and how could we work that out in the mean term to make not only our 5-year housing plan, but the housing task force work even more robust. We've talked about various projects that we could do together, and we still continue down that road. So we are actively pursuing a relationship with them, and they are with us to try to assist our membership in various housing programs around the region. So I wanted you all to know about that. I'm going to stop there for some questions, and then I'm going to introduce Heather. Any questions that I can answer, or any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, real quick. Are you building a certified development corp or a community development corp?
We're building a community development
Okay.
corporation.
Okay.
The reason being, Craig, is it's broader for us, and it allows us to work our statutory authority, our federal authority under it being a LDD, and our bylaws, which are very robust in the areas of community and economic development. So it allows us to do all those things under that hat.
Yeah, I'd agree, Scott. Thanks.
All right. If there's no other questions, I'd like to introduce our next guest. Are we good? I see no others. Good. Okay. At this time, I'd like to introduce not only a good friend to IPDC, but a real go-getter in our region, and that's Heather Cotton. She's the planning, I use the term planning director. That may be old school, Heather, I'm sorry, but it's community and economic and planning works for the city of Marion, who is an active group. Up there, they do a lot of bottom-up work in McDowell County. They've been blessed with, well, they've had bad enough data that they were blessed enough to get a series of KB Reynolds grants that really concentrated on the health and well-being of their community. in all of McDowell County, which has sprouted a lot of bottom-up work from community activism and how to make life better up there, to better health outcomes, to match programs, to there's currently a program to create a food hub in that region. But lots of really good stuff has come out of it, to include housing and transportation. So a lot of bottom-up work comes out of McDowell County. We feature them a lot in our newsletter on a Monday, just because they are doing some great best practices over there. And Heather and her group have, in the city of Marion, created a CDC. So I asked if, Nick, if you could give over control to Heather so that she can give up a little presentation she's going to do on how they put their CDC together with housing in mind, so you guys could learn a little bit more about housing real time in our region. Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you.
You're muted, Heather.
I'm muted, so I'll start over. Thanks, Scott. That was a great introduction, and it is awesome to see that IPDC is starting a regional CDC, because I created this CDC out of a need for our community, but we don't have the capacity to do it ourselves, and we definitely need regional partners to stand alongside us to do the work that we're doing. So I can't be more excited about this, because you and I, and even Doug, have talked about this for so many years, and I'm just, it's exciting. I have goosebumps thinking about where we are today and where we've come. So with that, I'm going to share briefly about the Marion CDC, the work we've done. This has been a labor of love for me. I do it for free. I've got the support of the city of Marion, who graciously allows me to do some of this work alongside my work as the planning director for the community. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and start that PowerPoint presentation for you. Okay, can everybody see the screen? Does it say Marion CDC?
You probably can't see us with our thumbs up. Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Yes, I cannot
We're
see
all
you.
giving you a thumbs up.
Okay, great. I can't see
Yeah.
you. Okay, let me move. Actually, let me move this screen over here, and then I can see you all. Okay, great. Okay, so it's called the Marion Community Development Corporation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. Our website is www.marionnc.org. And I don't know how many of you know this image, but it is the little engine that could, and that's how I feel. I have learned so much through this process. I saw a need in our community. I did not know how I was going to get there, but I kept pushing and chugging along to a point where we're starting to see some actual results and positive impacts coming out of the work from the Marion CDC. So here's just a little bit by the numbers for housing. 21% of McDowell County households are cost burdened, which means they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. 35% of renters have difficulty affording the homes that they live in, and 18% of homeowners are having difficulty affording the homes that they live in. And these numbers, I will say, are about a year old. I had created this presentation for another group, but I also think with COVID and where we're at, I don't know that our current numbers would accurately reflect what is going on. So these are still pretty much on par, but the average rent for a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Marion is in McDowell County is $683. The average renter can only afford about $632 a month. That's according to 30% of their household income. These numbers come from the North Carolina Housing Coalition and HUD, with our AMI at 48,300. So I'm not going to read through all these numbers. I just want to give you a quick overview of sort of what our housing looks like. We know that a conventional 30-year loan at $125,000 with a 4.5% interest rate would be about $633, and we know that that's about what the average renter could afford. So if we were going to get into building houses, affordable housing for our residents that they could purchase and build equity and personal wealth, we knew we needed to come in at a low price point. And that's very difficult to do in today's market. While interest rates have dropped, material costs have gone up. So the cost of construction for new homes in McDowell County ranges between $125 and $150 per square foot. So a real challenge there to really find the sweet spot where we could provide the folks that are in healthcare, childcare, construction, law enforcement, government, education. How do we get those folks into homes? Because the other thing that we've seen since I started this is a real change in our market. Before it wasn't a buyer's market. It was a buyer's market. It was not a seller's market. There was not a whole lot of competition in real estate, residential real estate. But now we're seeing people come down from Buncombe County and coming in from other locations. They can't compete locally. Our workforce can't compete when there's multiple offers on a home. So folks who are on our lower end of our spectrum on income are losing out to other people when it comes to trying to buy in the open private market for housing. So that's kind of a brief overview of where we're at in our community as far as housing goes. And then I wanted to also talk about why it became so important for me. I started to see things had been seeing things from a planning perspective that were really impacting our community and not for the good. And we needed to do something to change that. We had lost McDowell County Habitat for Humanity. That had been largely our nonprofit organization that had been building affordable housing in our community. They didn't plan for succession, so everyone aged out, and no one was filing their income, their taxes each year. The IRS revoked their 501c3 status. Habitat for Humanity International revoked their charter, and they weren't interested in reinstituting it under a new leadership. So there was a lot going on there, and so this is to lay the foundation. This is the pre-Marion CDC. Our problems included a lack of new home construction in the last 50 years. We had an aging housing stock that was beyond meeting urgent repair qualifications. So even though if we could acquire urgent repair funding from the North Carolina Housing Authority, we couldn't find homes that qualified because they were either too old, because our housing stock is such an aging housing stock, with most of our homes built prior to 1960, or they were in such disrepair that it cost too much, and so couldn't even qualify for those urgent repair funds that were out there. We had high rental rates and lack of private residential development, and as well as improvements. People weren't not even improving the homes that they owned or the homes that they were renting. And so, and that was over about 70% of our residential area. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that from a zoning standpoint, we only had, I called it the haves and the have-nots. 30% of our housing or our zoning provided for single family residential units, and that was it. And then all other 70% residential was for anything else. And we weren't seeing a lot of reinvestment in that 70%. And in that 70%, we are also seeing high crime rates and property abandonment. So some of the solutions that the city started looking at was condemning abandoned and dilapidated structures. I've been the planning director for over 14 years here and have gone through the condemnation process and the abatement process on over 40 structures, clearing those sites. A lot of those were abandoned properties. They went into foreclosure. And I went to our city manager and to the city council and asked them, instead of auctioning those properties off, to land bank those properties, to allow for some stability in some of these neighborhoods that were seeing a lot of problems as a result of disinvestment and blight. And so we also, so they agreed to that, and we started land banking some of these properties that we had cleaned up. We amended our zoning regulations to provide incentives for higher density residential development. And we established a minimum housing ordinance to mandate some improvements to some of the living conditions, especially in our rental market, because what we were finding is people were not maintaining their properties. They were asking for exceptionally high rental rates. And it was a bit on the predatory side. I heard, and this is anecdotal, I don't have the numbers, but commonly what would happen is they would have a high rent, and they would require first, last, and security. So they're looking at 1,800 at least minimum, to enter the home, but then couldn't afford to stay in it month to month. So then new renters would come in. The same thing would happen, and so they're losing their ability to find housing, while the landlords were banking on the fact that they were going to be collecting $1,800 every month from folks who could not afford the rents, and also the terrible conditions that some of these houses were in. So over the 2 years results, that I looked at our statistics to see what has changed since we started to implement those as a city. When I first got here until about 2 years ago, I could count on both hands how many residential housing permits we issued, and all of them, with the exception of one, was for a manufactured home. Since we implemented these new tools, these housing tools over the last 2 years, we've seen 17 new site-built residential permits issued. 3 of those were manufactured homes, with an average home value of $160,000. We've had 26 new residential homes in design with pre-construction approval, which means they've received site plan approval, but they've not received their building permits yet. They've not applied for those building permits yet. They're probably in the financing stage of getting those done. We've got a 60-unit multifamily residential development under construction, and we have 198 that are in design, which is incredible, with about estimated private investment value of $30 million. We also have $3 million plus in private investment in single-family residential improvements. Again, within that 70% area of residential that I was telling you about, where there had been little to no private investment in the last 50 years, we've now seen over the last 2 years, $3 million plus in private investment. And when I say improvements, that can be anything from upgrading an HVAC system, putting on a new roof, putting on new siding, all those different types of investment. We're starting to see some of those blighted areas come back on, increase in value, and also turnover to people who are want to be property owners and want to care for their property. So we're also seeing our crime decrease. So just over the last 2 years, we've seen a 27% decrease in arrests, 36% decrease in charges filed, a crime index that has dropped from 5.2% to 3.1%. And this is probably the most staggering, and I see it every day in our residential areas, is drug violations have dropped 52%. Now those are statistics coming from our Marion Police Department. So I can tell you, in a lot of the work I've done as a planning director outside of Marion CDC, a lot of the problems we were having with housing were also tied to a lot of the criminal activity around drug use or selling drugs. And so it's exciting to see those numbers. And I actually just put those numbers together today. And I really didn't even know that was the impact. Now, I can't take credit for all of the work that's been done for those results. I think part of it is the economy as well, but it was really exciting just to see that some of the work we've done in zoning and with the city has taken hold. So as part of that, and as I was going through this a couple of years ago, I realized McDowell Habitat for Humanity had ceased to operate, and so very similar, I think, to what happened with IPDC and your CDC and everything. Your assets got transferred to Asheville-Buncombe County. The same thing was going to happen with McDowell County Habitat for Humanity. They had created a board to dissolve the organization, and they were already in discussions with Asheville-Buncombe County Habitat to transfer about $100,000, actually over $100,000 worth of assets to the Asheville-Buncombe County Habitat, which would have meant that we would have lost, our community would have lost those assets for affordable housing. So I approached the board and I said, what if I created a nonprofit that worked towards affordable housing, utilizing the assets from McDowell Habitat for Humanity? Would you support that? And instead of transferring those assets to Asheville-Buncombe County, they agreed. So I had reached out to Habitat for Humanity International. They were not interested in renewing our charter. So I established a 501c3 community development corporation. One of the other reasons I decided to do that is exactly what Scott said earlier. Wanted to be broad enough that we could both do community development projects as well as economic development projects with the purpose of revitalizing the housing in our neighborhoods that had been significantly deinvested, help residents increase their personal wealth and achieve a better quality of life, and generate a greater economic prosperity for our community. And that is our mission there that you see. So again, I was doing a lot of this, most of this on my own, and I learned a lot through the process. I did not know how to build a website, but I built a website because I wanted us to have a web presence. It's fairly generic. You see it here on the right hand of the screen. But I wanted people to have a place to go. I prepared all the legal documents, the articles, of incorporation, the IRS filing, getting the EIN number, all of those materials, the bylaws that Scott was talking about, he's in the process of doing right now. I worked through that process. We developed the logo and the website. We worked with McDowell Habitat and the Secretary of State's office because they still hadn't gone through the process of dissolving their corporation. So I drafted the articles to dissolve the corporation. I also had to do the articles of merger, file those with the Secretary of State. It's not a difficult process, but there is a lot to do, and you want to make sure you're doing it right up front. So that takes time. I had to also set up accounts because we acquired promissory notes from 8 different properties, which was going to bring in $12,000 of additional revenue annually through 2021 because Habitat had held the mortgages on several properties. And so needed to make sure that the owners of those properties knew where to send the new payments and get that set up with the bank. So we had to do a lot of the logistics there. And then I started building relationships with the community, getting the word out about Marion Community Development Corporation, talking with developers. How do we build housing that's affordable with very limited resources? And also worked with the school system, talked with their engineering students. They've got a construction management program at the high school, and I got those kids involved in designing what a small single family home might look like. So really getting them to think about housing in their community as well. We also received some early building supply donations. Spencer's Hardware, which is Ace Hardware store here in Marion, donated $30,000 worth of building supplies. And we organized credit counseling and fair housing seminars, just utilizing some free resources that were out there and partnering with other agencies. So for example, we held a fair housing seminar. We've actually held one every year. It has not only helped us, the City of Marion, with our CDBG requirements for having access to fair housing resources, but it has also provided some resources for property managers, community organizers, government agencies, real estate agents, attorneys, and just interested citizens. There's people out there who are required to take fair housing courses every year, every 2 years to maintain certifications. And then there were folks out there who have some distrust in some of our property management agencies that are in a community that provide affordable housing. And so this was an opportunity for them to get more information straight from the resource on you know, what fair housing is and what resources were available to them if they had issues with a property management company in trying to access affordable housing. We also had held credit counseling courses early on. Again, before CDC occurred, I had reached out to Self-Help Credit Union in Asheville because I'd heard that they were offering some credit improvement programs for their clients, and they were offering them in Hendersonville, Asheville, and I believe Transylvania County. I knew that there was a Self-Help Credit Union in Old Fort, so I just went straight to the top. I asked them, why can't we provide this program over in Old Fort? It took about a year, but they did extend that program over to Old Fort. So now that there is a credit repair program in McDowell County. And we also, through that, built a relationship with WNC On Track, which provides credit counseling courses. And they had received a grant from TD Bank and to do credit counseling. And so they have offered 4 courses over here in McDowell County. It's a 3-part Money in Your Life educational series. And between 2018 and 2019, we had 30 participants. And we also held a avoiding schemes, scams, and fraud course workshop at our senior center, because those are the individuals that are typically targeted. And we had a total of 35 participants for that. So we were looking at opportunities, basically low-hanging fruit in year 1 and 2 as we were building up our housing program. The other thing we did is we wanted to take the donated materials and try to get that, because we could not access urgent repair funding, and we still have not been able to. I think for us, our community is too small to apply for urgent repair funds, and that's where IPDC is a great resource for us, because IPDC covers a region, and so if they've got access to urgent repair funds through the state, we can partner with them and share information about the houses out there that really need the urgent repair funds. But we can also be there to provide materials for those homes that may exceed the guidelines and don't qualify for urgent repair, and provide materials to help. We've repaired flooring, we've repaired roofs, we've repaired plumbing and electrical, and we contract with people who are contractors, licensed contractors to do the work. In some cases, we partner with our faith-based communities who have programs to go in and assist people with housing needs. And so I'm not going to go over this too much, but we were still trying to figure out, could we afford to build affordable housing? And the answer was yes, through off-frame modular construction. These were our goals for 2019. We wanted to start construction on single-family residential homes. We wanted to continue to do the work that we had been doing for our community in all the other different areas, because it's not just about housing, but it's about improving your credit, because your credit is tied to not only getting a mortgage, but your insurance rates and other things, getting a car, being mobile, being able to secure a job and be able to go to work each day. So all these things seem to tie in together, and we wanted to continue to do those things. So then we launched the single family homeownership program. We went down to, I'm going to call it Cherville, for lack of a better word, because I went to college over at University of Tennessee, and everybody calls Maryville. So just south or east of Shelby, there's Cherville or Cherryville. I don't know, you guys might know better than I. It is a modular, off-frame modular company called Arnell. Toured their facility. We were able to look at several different models that they developed in order to acquire some affordable housing that was going to be easy to build. I did not have the resources or the capacity like a Habitat to bring in volunteer laborers to actually do site-built construction. nor do I think we could have been able to build it based on material cost. Utilizing the land banked properties that the city had acquired through foreclosure, we partnered with them, and we had, and because we're a mill village, we have some very irregular and very small lots. They're non-conforming, but they're great for infill development. So we looked at two different styles. We looked at more of the shotgun style, which you see here, the Brantley Cottage. It's smaller, it's a 2-bedroom, it's a 1-bath, but it fits on those really narrow lots where there might have been a manufactured home before. It wasn't quite, you know, it might have had been 40 feet wide and 80 feet deep. There was also, we also have small square lots. And so we looked at a slightly larger home with 2-bedroom, 2-bath. Again, just keeping it affordable, looking at what our population that would need housing. So elderly, veterans, and families, you know, that are just starting in our workforce. This was a slightly larger one, and actually this is the one we ultimately went with. It's a little different, but this is the house we ended up developing, 11,000, or excuse me, 1,200 square foot home, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. This is, the layout is a little bit different as well, but as you'll see, the design is very similar to the rendering you see here. Here's just some pictures of what the interior of the Arnell homes look like. So they're very, very nice, quality built homes. This is actually a picture of the smaller shotgun home, if you will. So the 2-bedroom, 1-bath. In order to qualify for our houses, you had to be 80% or below the median household income. You have to be able to secure a FDIC insured loan from an FDIC insured bank. And the reason for that is we do not want folks to go to a lender who is not insured. And we also want to try to discourage people from getting a loan from a predatory lender who is going to have a higher interest rate and put them more at risk for themselves going into foreclosure, not being able to afford their mortgage payments, and also taking away from their wealth. So in order to do that, to ensure that, mortgages can't exceed 30% of their household income. So if they've got high interest rate, that may pick them out of that category. But we also have been working with Self-Help Credit Union, First Bank, and another lending institution here in the community who all have great loan packages for first-time home buyers, and also people who are in the process of rebuilding their credit. And so a couple of those loan packages start with a credit score of 620. So I think a lot of the folks, we've gotten several applications and several of the folks meet these qualifications. And of course, the applicant has to be the owner occupant. We are not allowing people to purchase this property as a rental property. And the house, this is the house that we just finished building. I'm really proud of it. Thanks, Scott. We had hoped to have a ribbon cutting and a big splash in the paper because it was the first house. It was a huge accomplishment. But then right as we got CO'd, well, you know what happened. I don't have to share that. So there was only going to be social distancing, so we couldn't have a ribbon cutting and have people there. But it is a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,000 square foot home on a 1/4 acre lot. Now, I would have liked to have gotten at least 2 homes on this lot, but what you can't see from the back is it actually drops off fairly steep. And so it was only conducive for 1 house. It is off-frame modular construction. And again, 80% household income limit, has to be primary lit, and I've gone through all these other things, so I'm not going to share those. One thing I did talk with Sarah Grimes about as we were starting this process and trying to think through how to keep these homes affordable. I had worked in a community down in Florida where we required a 30-year affordable housing deed restriction, and she said, you know, you might want to think about scaling that back because after so many years, you don't want people not to reinvest in that property. So with a 15-year affordable housing deed restriction, it allows you enough time to continue to get more affordable housing stock into your community. And also as the properties sell and then go market rate, people are reinvesting into those properties. So we're going with a 15-year affordable housing deed restriction. Here's what the inside of the house looks like. I know that light fixture looks really low and I always hit my head on it when I go in there. It is supposed to lift up and be on a chain. That's where a small table, dining room table would go. But we didn't want to lift it up. We want the new owner to do that. But it comes with all appliances. It's energy efficient. It's nice and spacious. Our McDowell County Board of Realtors partnered with us. They provided landscaping and some curb appeal on the to help with the curb appeal of the house as part of their annual community service program. So we're really excited about this first home. We've got another property, a vacant property right behind it, over in our West Marion community that is going to take a little bit more investment for site prepping, site development, and it's a smaller lot. And this was in an area where the value of homes around it were slightly higher. So while this one is $130,000, we'll have a similar home in the West Marion community and hope to have that at about $125,000. We've already received, as of yesterday, and I've not had a chance to look today, but as of yesterday, we advertised this late last week and we had 4 applications. All of those applications meet our income qualifications. And so what we're doing is just verifying income, and then it's first come, first serve on folks who had turned in their application first. We'll select that person. We'll go through the pre-approval process. They'll get qualified with a bank. They'll enter into a contract with us, but if they decide at any time through the process prior to closing that they are not interested in pursuing the home, that's fine. We will move on to the next person in the queue. And and 2 years later, maybe their family grows, maybe he gets a promotion and they need a larger home. So they put this house on the market. Now that house has a 13-year deed restriction. So when they go to sell it, they have to sell it to someone else at a rate that someone 80% or below the area median income could afford.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A quick question. Great presentation. Appreciate that, Heather. What was the selling price on that last house on the 1/4 acre lot, that 1,000 square foot?
130.
130? Thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm. We really were shooting for 125, and the reason we increased that amount slightly is because, again, this is in an area with higher home values, and we knew that the banks are going to require an appraisal. So our affordability is tied to that. And we knew that there's other locations in our community that may not the difference if the appraisal comes in too low, to be able to get that person into the home, even if it doesn't appraise at the value that for affordability.
Did you guys decide against the shotgun houses?
No, so it really is all, so we've got those 2 models to go. We know we can afford those in this price point. And so we use those based on what the lot that were donated to us, what will fit on there. So that's really what dictates whether it's the shotgun style or the square box style. Preferably we go with a square box style if we've got room, but we also want to utilize any of the vacant properties that we have. So we'll go with a shotgun home for a smaller home, which work for retiree or a single parent type situation.
What were the price points on the shotgun homes?
So the shotgun home without site prep, without anything, and this was an early 2019 price, was $93,000. The 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,000 square foot home was 108 without site preparation. So we have to factor in site preparation as well as water and sewer tap fees, building permits, things like that. And then of course, one thing that I did not factor into that price in the beginning, but has been okay, is just having your utilities turned on in the interim between, Marion CDC owning the property and the next person owning the property. So all your utilities and your insurance. So we've got, and our insurance prices are higher because it is not a primary residence and there's no one occupying that property. So we have a special insurance, but it costs us more than if it were if it was a private residence.
Someone asked a question, Heather, about what your mortgage rate or cost is on that house.